I come over to the screen because depending on your age, you might be able to remember this. The winter of discontent in the late 1970s. That's November 78, February 79 to be entirely precise. Britain was effectively brought to a standstill by widespread strikes as workers across various industries walked out in protest over low pay. It led to scenes like this in London's Leicester Square as mountains of rubbish lay uncollected. Well, fast forward more than 4 decades. We shot these pictures in Edinburgh this morning. If you were watching earlier on in the programme, we showed you some of this. Refuse collectors are on strike there too, and bins are already overflowing. That strike's got another week still to go, so you can imagine what those bins are going to look like and smell like by the end of it. So could another winter of discontent actually be on the horizon? Well, there's a lot going on, and there are worries that strike in Edinburgh could be extended to the whole of Scotland by the end of this week. We've already seen huge amount of disruption to the rail network this summer. 4 major unions instructing their members to go on strike. That looks set to continue, although no more strike dates yet have been confirmed. And as we were just talking about, an 8-day strike of hundreds of port workers at Felixstowe is underway. That is Britain's largest container port. Lots of stuff we use every single day, things like clothes and kettles, all sorts of things comes through there. This morning, the criminal barristers in England and Wales voted in favour of an all-out strike in a row over jobs and pay. We're not finished yet. There's still some more to come. Royal Mail staff in the Communication Workers Union will strike over pay between the 26th and the 31st of the end of this month, and then again next month on the 8th and 9th of September. And finally, votes on strike action are taking place over the coming weeks by Unite NHS members in England and Wales and Royal College of Nursing members. Well, loads of issues on the table in the middle of a cost of living crisis as well, and plenty of inconvenience for millions of us too. Joining us now to talk more about this is Professor Len Shakleton from the Institute of Economic Affairs, and we also have Kate Bell, who's the TUC's union's Head of Employment Rights. Really good to talk to you both. Thank you so much for being with us. Kate, we know that the TUC is, of course, an umbrella network. There's many unions represented. What are you hearing from some of your members with regards to this strike action, which we, as just described, are seeing in so many parts of the UK at the moment?
Well, you mentioned the cost of living crisis, and what we're hearing is that workers have really been pushed to the brink of, 10 years of the longest wage squeeze we've seen for 200 years. Workers losing out on thousands of pounds worth of pay, and really scary figures around inflation. So people seeing 2 months' wages eaten up by inflation. And unfortunately, many workers have been pushed to the brink by these conditions, and the pay offers they're getting from their employers just really aren't enough to match that huge pressure on the cost of living. And, strike action is always a last resort for workers. They want to get around the table, they want to get on with delivering their jobs. But what we've seen, as you've said, in sectors across the economy, whether it's refuse workers, postal workers, people who are working right through the pandemic, is, unfortunately, they haven't been able to get the employer to the table with a decent pay offer, and they have needed to go on strike action to get those negotiations moving.
Len, Kate has mentioned the cost of living crisis a few times in that first answer, and we've talked about it a lot on this programme as well. I'm sure it's squeezing everybody watching us tonight. But how is the government going to afford extra money on wages and some of the other things that are being demanded in the middle of this crisis?
Yeah, of course, a lot of these strikes are essentially strikes against the government. The government is the only paymaster for the bin workers, for the railways, essentially, and so on. And it is rather worrying that we've seen this kind of action. We've had people like Mick Lynch, for example, talking loosely about a general strike. That would be a very strange situation to be in after 40 years after we thought, Mrs. Thatcher and John Major and so on had passed a lot of union legislation that would prevent this kind of thing happening. But here we are back again. It's like I saw before, you had a revival of steps. They're getting back on the road. Well, so it appears are many of our 1970s mentalities. We're back again with this kind of stuff.
We'll hear from, I don't know if you're a Steps fan, Len, we're going to hear from them later on in the programme. But to both of you, we've been asking our viewers about this today. Tessa's going to bring in some of those comments a little bit later on. But Kate, one thing when we often ask our viewers on 5 News about their views over strikes, we tend to get a sort of 50-50 split. Are you concerned with the ongoing nature of these discussions, with more strikes planned, that there will be a point when you lose some of that support from the general public?
Well, I think people know that people are on strike in these pretty desperate situations. And I think, people across the economy are experiencing that. Some of those strikes, of course, are in the public sector, but some of them are also against big private sector companies. You mentioned Royal Mail and BT paying out record levels of dividends to their shareholders. And I think people look at that and think that's just not right. Just today we had research out saying CEOs are getting a 39% pay rise while workers are getting pay offers which are well below inflation. And I think most people looking at that know that those workers taking strike action, it's inconveniencing those workers. They don't want to be inconveniencing the general public. But I think most people will understand why they've been pushed into that situation.
Well, we can take a listen now, actually, to what some of our viewers have had to say about this. And as Dan mentioned, actually, it is a fairly even split. Let me start with John in Hull, who says it's all very well going on strike, but it only really hurts the British public and not those that can do or change anything. Aileen in Dunoon says everyone has the right to strike, but I honestly don't think that this is the right time. And then we have the other side, Michelle in the North East. She says, as I'm part of the Royal Mail group, I'm very much with striking. Gareth in Wales agrees. He says the government's got a lot to answer for. There'd been no pay rises for years. And others saying they just don't feel they have a choice. And I'm interested to know, Len, your thought on this. I interviewed a nurse the other day, for instance, a critical care nurse, who says the last thing she wants to do is to leave her patients without care, but she feels like she doesn't have a choice. What else could she do?
It is a very difficult situation for some groups of workers, although I think those who are noisiest in this current sequence are not the poorest paid workers. As I was saying before, a lot of this stuff comes back to government. The reason why we're in this mess, remember, let me just remind you of this, that we've been through 2 years of lockdown, which means a big hit to the economy. And it's all very well saying that, yes, profits are up now. When you look at what profits were down there during the depths of lockdown, it's a very different picture. So we've got all the consequences of lockdown, which we're going to feel for a long time yet. Plus, of course, Ukraine, which has messed up the whole energy model which Britain has been working on. So there are major problems for the British economy. And to assume that it's mean Tories or cruel employers and this kind of rhetoric doesn't get us very far. We've got to think about what we can afford in this country. And I'm afraid it does mean that some groups are going to experience a cut in living standards. That's a consequence of the kind of mess we're in.
Kate, how do you respond to Len's point there?
Well, profits have recovered from their pre-COVID levels. And at the moment, the people who are being asked to experience that cut in living standards are the people who got us through the pandemic. They're the key workers, they're the refuse workers, they're the port workers who are absolutely vital to us surviving that critical point and who we said we were going to reward. Once again, we're asking workers to take the hit. We're leaving the CEOs alone. As I said, their pay up by 39%. We're leaving the shareholders alone. We're seeing record levels of dividends paid out. I think, this time workers are saying, actually, we cannot afford to take the hit again. That's an approach we've tried over the last decade. Workers were told to take the hit from the financial crisis, told to take the hit from COVID. And I think, workers are understandably saying, we can't go on like this. We've got nothing left to give and we do need a pay rise.
Kate Bell, appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And also Professor Len Shakleton, great to talk to you on 5 News. And thank you to everyone who sent in a message tonight as well to the 5 phone. Thank you, guys.